Hello? Hello? Are you out there? Okay, there you are. Hey, today we're going to talk about Congress, starting with Chapter 1, Section 1. It's our intro to Congress. We want to make sure that by the end of our time we can answer the following questions. Why does the Constitution divide power between the two houses of Congress? What is a term of Congress? And how have sessions of Congress changed over time? And we're going to differentiate between what a term of Congress is and what a session of Congress is. I'll pause for a moment so you can get this down. Okay, so we have two houses of Congress. We already know that, hopefully, from our Constitution outline. Two houses we also refer to as bicameral. Two houses, Latin, bicameral. So the framers of the Constitution, our founding fathers, created a bicameral legislature for three reasons, three very good reasons, as you'll see. First, there's a historical reason. That's what the colonists and now the future states knew in terms of their own legislature and their own experience with a legislature. The British Parliament had been bicameral, had been a two-house legislature for hundreds of years, since the 1300s, and many of the colonial assemblies, the colonial legislatures, were also bicameral. So historically, it's what they knew. There was also a practical reason. A bicameral legislature allowed the framers to compromise in terms of how representation would be determined from each state in Congress. And I don't know if you remember or not from your U.S. history, but there was the large state plan and the small state plan. The Virginia plan, large state, and the New Jersey plan, small state, to determine how states would be represented in Congress. The Virginia plan held that states would get representation in Congress based on how many people they had, based on their population. Well, that was a great advantage if you were a large state, but if you're a small state, you would basically have no say in Congress and its rulings. So smaller states like New Jersey, led by New Jersey, came up with their own version of representation, saying that it should be equal. Every state, the 13 colonies, these future states, would get 2, 3, 4, however many representatives. Each state would get the same. And there had to be some sort of compromise, and a bicameral legislature allowed them to compromise, so that you have one house that was based on representation and another house that was based on an equal representation. The House of Representatives, large states, representation based on population. And then the Senate made the smaller states happy because it was equal representation, and it was determined that every state would get two. And the third reason was a theoretical reason. The framers, as they sat there at the Constitutional Convention, realized that if they had a two-house Congress, a bicameral Congress, one house could be a check on the other house, and vice versa. And so having those two houses and giving them different types of representation and different things that they could do allowed one house to act as a check on the other. So again, three reasons why the framers created a bicameral legislature. There's historical reason. It's what they knew. It's what it had been their experience. There's a practical reason of providing a compromise between the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plans of how states would be represented in Congress. And a theoretical reason. By having two houses, one could act as a check on the other house. And to illustrate that point, there's this famous story. Hopefully it's true. Jefferson, who had just returned from France, told George Washington that he was opposed to a two-chamber, a bicameral legislature. As he made his point, he poured his coffee into his saucer, and Washington asked him why he did so. "To cool it," replied Jefferson. "Even so," said Washington, "we pour legislation into the senatorial saucer to cool it." And that's illustrating the theoretical reason for having a bicameral legislature. You wouldn't just pick up a hot pot of coffee and drink straight from that pot of coffee. You'd pour it in a cup. A lot of you had coffee this morning. You poured it in a cup or a mug so that you could actually drink it. The cup cools it. It keeps it warm, but it cools it. Well, the Senate would provide that same function. The Senate would be the saucer, cooling any crazy legislation that the House of Representatives might come up with.
I was putting one more tap of coffee in my coffee cup, and out of the corner of my eyes, I saw two guys come in, one with a black hoodie, one with a white hoodie. And the guy with the black hoodie said, "We want your money, everybody up front and down." And I'm like, oh, why do I need coffee now? And so the guy in the black suit's coming down, and I'm like, don't look, don't look, don't look. So I'm putting my hair down, and he comes right to me, and he goes, "Get down now." And I go, "Yes, sir." And I just dropped to my knees, see my little knee. And then when I'm on my knees, I'm backing up, backing up, backing up, backing up, backing up, backing up. Because my daddy taught me good, and I'm backing the hell out of there. And then when I figure I'm safe, I'm like counting to 2,000, and I don't hear nothing. Then I hear boom, boom, boom. And I'm like, oh my God. And so I back farther and farther away. And I think maybe I should faint, but I don't. And so then I'm thinking, count to 2,000 again. So I did. Then I go, mi amigos, mi amigos. Nobody said nothing. I'm like, oh my God, they're dead. I'm like, I'm going to have to find all my friends dead. And then they were laughing. They shot the rubber. He's a hero. Saved all three of us.
A great criminal witness. All right, so let's talk about a term of Congress. A term is the length of time that officials serve after an election, as in a 2 or a 6-year term, right? We're familiar with the use of the word term for that. It's the length of time somebody is elected for. Well, when we talk about a congressional term, we're talking about the 2-year period when Congress is in session between elections. Elections are in November. And then whoever is elected, they actually are sworn in January. And so from January to 2 years later, that same January 3rd, that's a congressional term every 2 years. So back a year ago, November, when we elected a new president, we also elected a new Congress, and that congressional term began January 3rd, 2017, and it will end 2 years later, January 3rd, 2019. Now, the date for the start of each new term, each new congressional term, has been set by the 20th Amendment as noon of the 3rd day of January of every odd-numbered year. So every January 3rd of every odd-numbered year, so again, last January 3rd, at noon, the congressional term began. And we'll be talking about that first day of each term of Congress. It used to be March 4th, and they changed it to January 3rd. March 4th was just too much time from the election in November to March 4th. What is that, 5 months? And back in the day when there was no transportation, mass transportation, information was slow to get around, members of Congress needed that time, and president needed that time to get their affairs in order, because they were going to go to Washington, D.C., and it wasn't like they could hop on a jet and come home for the weekend and then go back to Congress. They couldn't go back and forth and meet with their constituents and all that. So that March date was important. It gave them time to get their affairs in order because they were going to be gone for half the year, or at least 4 or 5 months. But by 1933, people got around a little easier, and that was just too long of a period of time from the election to the new Congress being sworn in.
I'm backing up, backing up, backing up, backing up. Cause my daddy taught me good. I'm backing it all out of there. And I'm like, oh my god, oh my god, my god. I'm backing up, backing up, backing up, backing up. Cause my daddy taught me good. And I think maybe I should faint, but I don't. My daddy taught me good. I was good one more time, but called me in my coffee cup. And in the corner of my eyes, I saw two guys come in. One with the black hoodie, one with the white hoodie, black hoodie, white hoodie. They said, we want your money, everybody down. And I'm like, oh, why did I be coming down? And so the guy in black suit's coming down, 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 down. And I'm backing up, backing up, backing up, backing up. Cause my daddy taught me good. I'm backing it all out of there. And I'm like, oh my god, oh my god, my god. I'm backing up, backing up, backing up, backing up. Cause my daddy taught me good. And I think maybe I should faint, but I don't. My daddy taught me good. So I back farther and farther away. And I'm like, don't look, don't look, don't look. And he comes right to him and he goes, get down now, get down now. And I just drop to my knees, see my woolly. And then when I figure I'm safe, I'm like, count to 2,000 and I'll hear nothing, nothing. Then I hear, no, no, no. I'm like, oh my god, they're dead. So I'm backing up, backing up, backing up, backing up. Cause my daddy taught me good. I'm backing it all out of there. And I'm like, oh my god, oh my god, my god. I'm backing up, backing up, backing up, backing up. Cause my daddy taught me good. And I think maybe I should faint, but I don't. My daddy taught me good. I'm like, I'm gonna have to find all my friends dead. And then they were laughing. They shot the river. Hero of the day, saved my life, saved my life. Hero of the day, saved my life. Mi amigos, he's a hero. Hero of the day, saved my life, saved my life. They shot the river. Hero of the day, saved my life. Mi amigos, he's a hero. Hero of the day, saved my life. Hero, saved my life. They shot the river. Hero, saved my life, saved my life. Mi amigos, he's a hero. Hero of the day, saved my life, saved my life. They shot the river. Hero of the day, saved my life. Mi amigos, he's a hero. Backing up, backing up, backing up, backing up. My daddy taught me good. I'm backing it all out of there. And I'm like, oh my god, oh my god, my god. I'm backing up, backing up, backing up, backing up. My daddy taught me good. And I think maybe I should faint, but I don't. My daddy taught me good.
Okay, so let's talk about what a session of Congress is. A session is the period of time during which Congress actually conducts its business. So Congress adjourns or suspends its session until the next session, each regular session as it sees fit. They decide when they will adjourn their session. There are 2 sessions in every term. 2 sessions in every term. If necessary, the president has the power to prorogue or adjourn a session himself, but only when the 2 houses cannot agree on a date for adjournment, and they both have to agree. So far, the president has never been able to use that power. Congress has always agreed. Now, the president can call a Congress into special session, a meeting to deal with some emergency situation, but that hasn't happened since 1948, I think, because the reality is Congress is in session almost year-round anyways, so there's no reason. There's maybe a 2-week period in December to January when Congress is not in session. And here's just a comparative look at some.